Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Ellie Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Good to see you again.
Sitting here
Especially
with
in this chair, man. This chair makes me uncomfortable. All the setup, the lights, the cameras, makes me very uncomfortable. So I know I'm taking medicine. It's a form of surrender for me. It's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here, man.
I hear you. Okay, so let me introduce you, and then I actually wanted to ask you a question about the chair, honestly.
Let's go.
It's like the first question I had. So I'm sitting here with Danny Reznik, a friend, a colleague, and the host, amongst other things, but also the host of the Getting Out of the Way podcast.
What's up, Ellie?
Which is kind of the opposite of, is In Search of More, is Getting Out of the Way the opposite of In Search of More?
Depends on how we look at it, I guess, but it's a nice kind of balancing point. So,
right.
We can get into that if you want.
Yeah, both exist. But the question I was going to ask you, being that you record podcasts, I was wondering if you think the chair changes the conversation. Meaning out of the fact that it pivots, it's kind of comfortable, you can like really... I don't know what the word is, but you can kind of like snuggle up into this.
Yeah.
You think it changes
a little bit?
Like, would the podcast be different if we had different chairs?
I think everyone's going to respond to the chair very differently, right? And then it's not just the chair, because then we start the dialogue. I forget about the chair. Now I'm in the words, right? So I don't know if I could answer that cleanly. I could speak on my own behalf and say, man, it's quite comfortable. If it was up to me, like really, for me, I want my back. I want my spine kind of erect. I don't want to feel like I'm slouching too much.
Right.
And I feel that kind of just straightens me out a little bit, and I'm here to get straightened out, so it feels appropriate. But the chair's dope, man. I like it a lot. I like the style. I like that it swivels. No complaints.
Yeah, I wondered about that because I have like a cooler, like I'm a little more relaxed on the podcast than maybe I am in real life. Not to change, not as thinking of a character, just it happens. And I was wondering if the chair is some of that, and if maybe I did all my work in this kind of chair or something, everything would be more relaxed.
No, but if you want to see people squirm, do a stool, forget the chair, and just have them really kind of hold their self up.
But it seems like this chair is doing that for you also.
Again, I adjusted my seat a little bit, so my posture is a little bit different. So I can say, okay, now it's a little bit firmer, my back's a little more erect. So I don't know if it's the chair.
Oh, I didn't mean...
I think it's how we use the chair.
Right, I meant figuratively the chair, meaning the studio, the space. I could get you a little bit... You were saying that at the beginning.
It's the camera and the lights.
You don't do your podcast filmed?
No, we actually filmed for the first time before we went away for the summertime. And we were kind of trying out a new setup, because the way we started the podcast, it was really, it was kind of me dipping my toe in the water to, take my own temperature and see if it was appropriate for me to do these kind of integration talks with other individuals. People have a lot of apprehension kind of really opening up. And so the most gentle way to do that was audio only. That's what we found, at least in the beginning. I know that when it comes to all the kind of the viewers, everybody wants to connect with a human being. The audio kind of doesn't deliver the entire package. Mm-hmm. So I know kind of what people want to see, but at the same time, we wanted to give people the comfort to be free, because the whole purpose of that podcast was really about helping people and helping them integrate. And if there was, let's say, an element of that dialogue that made people feel uncomfortable, then they don't really kind of share what they need to share, especially when they're coming out of, let's say, a medicine session, a psychedelic experience. There's a lot of deep stuff that comes up. And for us to do a proper integration, we have to be comfortable with one another, to have that conversation openly, frankly, and we really want to tie off any loose ends, because we don't want to walk away from one of these deep experiences without integrating, without, with having kind of anything that's not tied down.
So let's explain this for those unfamiliar with your podcast. So your podcast, which is called Getting Out of the Way, assists people in integrating their psychedelic experiences. And it does that in two ways. One is your own voice, just talking, sharing different ideas by yourself. And the other is in conversation with others, helping them process or integrate their psychedelic experience. Did I capture that?
Yes, and there's more. I don't know if I don't know if I'm helping anyone. I think I'm helping myself, really, in expressing myself and sharing my perspective, in really letting go of me. It was for me to get out of the way, and it was uncomfortable for me to even get on a microphone and do anything publicly, because that was not my persona, so to speak. I'm a very private person, no social media, no nothing. And behind the scenes, getting out of the way, I was kind of talking about my own process. I'm trying to get out of my own way and put myself into these kind of uncomfortable situations to work through them, to use them as a tool to help myself, really. And we're all dealing with this kind of human condition, and we're all dealing with a lot of common factors in being alive. And so I guess the idea was, if I can share myself openly and make another person comfortable in doing the same thing, then we can both bring a level of perspective to the conversation that could possibly unlock something for each of us together. So I don't see me helping anyone. I see us helping one another as a collective, as a group. And that was happening without any microphone. But then I realized, wow, those common denominators that unify us as humans are shared by more than just me and you in this conversation. So it's kind of almost our responsibility to share this conversation with a wider audience, and whoever's going to get what they're going to get from it, it's up to them. But here I am expressing myself, and that level of openness and expression resonates. It has a very high vibration, and it's magnetic in a way. And so if I'm doing that and you feel comfortable and you're doing that, and we're talking about stuff that we have, in common as humans, and I might be dealing with a bad mood, depression, anxiety, anything that we deal with psychologically speaking, is shared by a whole lot of people. And so if I could unlock something in me through this dialogue, through this workout of sorts, and it could benefit even one other individual out there, then it's my responsibility to share it, because otherwise what am I doing? I'm hiding. And that's not going to do me any favors. I'm just going to find my comfort zone and hide in that comfort zone. So getting out of the way was my integration. It was my personal integration, and it lent itself to these kind of dialogues, and then that lent itself to a wider audience. So we said, hey, let's start recording these things. And there was no camera on purpose to, make everyone feel comfortable and to be able to share some of this really deep, heavy stuff that we're dealing with. That seemed to resonate with some people out there, but it's evident that, the algorithms want what they want, and they want to see a face, they want to see an individual, they want, a really full picture. And it helps. It helps not only, I'm not doing this for the algorithm, but the algorithm is based on, kind of...
It reaches more people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just recently we put the cameras on, and...
How's that going?
It was interesting. It was unique. To kind of tie it back to your question, it's foreign to me. It made me feel uncomfortable, so it forced me into a kind of level of surrender, because it's like, hey, you're going to do this anyway, kid. You better kind of get comfortable with it and open up and find those aspects of you that are uncomfortable with it, and understand why is it that you're uncomfortable in front of a camera. And that kind of started to teach me a lot about myself, and helped me find areas of my own personhood that were standing in the way of sharing some of these conversations and sharing about myself. So I said, wow, if it's making me uncomfortable, it probably means I need to lean into it a little bit more. I mean, plant medicine has taught me enough that, hey man, you're gonna breathe, you're gonna surrender to this experience, everything's gonna pass, but it's gonna be uncomfortable for a little bit. But through those uncomfortable moments, we see growth. Right? We feel better afterwards. Like going to the gym, it's really uncomfortable, but afterwards I feel a lot better. And the more I kind of stick with it, the better I feel, and the more my apprehension dissipates. And so it works the same way in this capacity. So how did it go? We're doing the thing. I don't know. I'm not about results. We do the effort. Right. The universe is in charge of outcomes, not my business. But I am starting to feel better. I'm starting to feel a little more relaxed. I didn't freak out as much when I got into this chair. So I know, okay, we're kind of getting somewhere. Where, I have no clue, but maybe you can help me figure that out.
Oh, we'll see where it goes. I started audio only as well. I mean, I started on Zoom originally, and then just putting those on a podcast. But then when I started doing recordings just for the podcast, I did it audio only, and we had an audience, people were listening, but it didn't feel they certainly didn't feel like they were connecting to me.
Right.
That's what I think the difference was. So even though people listened, it was like, okay, I'm listening to this podcast. But once I put my face on it, it changed both guests' willingness to come on, say, oh, okay, I've seen you before, have a conversation. Okay, this makes sense. I understand what it is. I've seen it. And then the people who were listening, I felt more of a personal relationship with me. It definitely changes something. It almost was as like I didn't have, as far as anyone else was concerned, I didn't have a podcast until I went to video.
And that makes sense. And I see it. I mean, I see the value there, but I also see the danger. Like, I don't want people to connect with me. I don't want people to connect with me. I'm not the thing. I don't want this to be about me. I want this to be about every individual, as an individual, using this tool or this podcast as a mirror of sorts that could help them see themselves in a different way, from a slightly different angle. So it is dangerous. Like I said, I understand it's necessary, and I understand exactly what you're saying, but I definitely don't want this to be about me.
Understood. I hear that.
I want to really get out of the way, because at the end we're looking at ourselves. We're just projecting all our stuff out there, and the aspects of ourselves that are deeply kind of rooted in there that we don't want to see and we think are buried. The mind and the psychology of it all is looking to free us up anyway. And so it's like I'm pressing it all down, but deep down inside of me somewhere, on some level, my system knows it doesn't belong in there. So it's going to try to use all these cool little funky techniques to get all that stuff up and out, to keep me empty and to keep me light and healthy. So what do? The aspects of ourselves that are so far hidden, we end up projecting them all over the place. We project it onto our relationships. We project it onto our colleagues, our peers, and everything. And so we say, oh, it's you, it's them, it's them, it's them. But then there's another way to play the game to say, wait a minute, if I recognize this is a projection of me, then it's not them. That person is just kind of a mirror in this moment, letting me see me from an angle I'm uncomfortable of seeing from a conscious perspective. So it starts in the subconscious, right, and starts to percolate, and it wants out, and so my mind projects it onto him.
Can you give
her.
some examples that would?
I mean, can I give some examples? I mean, it's all a reflection.
Right. So give an example of something that someone may see as a projection, and then as they understand.
I'm standing online.
What that projection
to
is.
check out at the grocery store. I mean, to use something simple that we could all possibly relate to. I'm standing in line at the grocery store, and somebody cuts in front of me, and I start to get angry. And I say, this person just cut in front of me. It's going to cost me 5 more minutes, and da-da-da-da-da. Now I'm starting to get angry. So I can leave it at that. That's the superficial layer. This person cut in front of me. I got angry at this person. But wait a minute. The anger's inside of me right now. And so how does that make me feel? It's screwing with everything, right? So I get this stressful reaction. I'm feeling the anger. I can say it's this person, and I can say this is the stimulus that created this response in me, but the response is in me, and so now I'm carrying anger. So if I can go past that superficial layer, I can kind of take a deeper look at myself and say, wait a minute, so I have anger in me. Clearly, it's coming up. This is the trigger for it to come up, but that's not the cause necessarily. That might be a symptom. So what's the cause? Well, why do I have anger in me? What's going on? What is it, right? Did it happen this morning? Did it start 5 years ago? Did it happen when I was a kid? And I start going deeper and deeper, and I'm like, wow, I start to recognize why I feel anger in the first place, and then I could possibly unlock it. But if I just leave it at the superficial layer, I'm always going to blame the outside world for triggering me, but I'm never going to look at the cause of it all and the fact that, hey, I could be triggered, but if I don't have ammunition in me, you can trigger me all you want. There's nothing popping off. But if something's popping off, then I'm a loaded gun. I have to unload that. The only way to unload that is to look in here. So we're projecting our entire reality, frankly. I mean, on a neurological level, if we want to get into the science, and we could look at this, and you can check out Huberman. He's great for a lot of this stuff, but ultimately, we're kind of we're projecting it all. Nothing is the way it seems.
So in this case, where there's a discomfort being on video, right? So there's an objective reality. There's a video. There's a camera.
Sure.
But you're doing the exact same thing you're doing without the camera. And most likely there's a camera on us
Maybe,
anyway.
maybe not. Because when we know we're being observed,
No,
we
I
behave
know.
very differently.
Right. No, I understand. I'm saying that you're doing the same thing, but because the camera's there, now you start doing something different.
Of course.
But other than that, it's just a conversation. You and I have had tons of conversations, but there's something different now that there's a microphone. That different can turn to more alertness, more nervousness, right? Very different realities. So you're saying with each one, there's something to teach me about me.
Absolutely. Whatever comes up, whatever comes up in that moment, in those uncomfortable moments, is something worth taking a look at. It's not mundane. It shouldn't be glanced over. It could teach me about me. Or I could just leave it at the superficial layer and say, oh, it's just the world. It's just the world. The world's cruel. The world's a bad place. This person's evil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That may be so, but what could I learn from it? And if I can't learn anything from it, then again, I'm just kind of caught in this state of playing the blame game, so to speak. And then I don't grow, so to speak.
So could that work in the other way? I'm thinking of the two examples I gave. One would be, these kind of conversations bring out an alertness and an engagement that maybe the camera and microphone wouldn't bring to me.
But it brings more than that. I mean, for you, possibly, right? But it brings more than that. It brings the idea of being judged. It brings...
Oh, it could, potentially.
Sure.
Right. I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking just for the conversation. Meaning for someone else, it can bring a certain nervousness. Right? Objectively, you and I are having conversation with cameras and videos and microphones. Mm-hmm. With cameras, lights, and microphones. For you, at this point, it's newer. It's bringing a certain level of nervousness. For me, I don't feel that, but I do feel an alertness and an engagement. So
that's not there without the cameras and mics?
No.
Interesting. That's
not there without. No, it's like everything else is tuned out right now. When you're looking at a like iPhone has that mode, portrait mode.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm on portrait mode. You're on portrait mode right now, right? Everything else behind you is hazy. Whatever else is going on is hazy, and I know that for the next, say, hour and a half, there's very little that could take me away from this conversation.
That's interesting. And why doesn't that apply in day-to-day when the mics and cameras aren't here?
I'm thinking that, it's a good question. I'm thinking that the reason is that I don't know that you will be, so then I won't be.
Explain.
Meaning I know I have your engagement right now.
Yep.
So as a result, I can bring mine. I think that's why.
And okay, so without the cameras and mics, you feel that the individual you're talking to is not fully present?
The conversation could be interrupted by a lot, let's say. There are a lot of things that, without the cameras and mics, there are a lot of things that can happen. I'm not talking about you specifically. You happen not to be that way, but in general, when we're in conversations in 2024, without cameras, lights, video, there's a lot that can pull someone away from that conversation.
But at the same time, with lights, camera, and video, are you getting an authentic individual or are you getting a manipulated kind of persona because they know they're being observed? Because typically when people know they're being observed, they act and behave very differently. We all do, right? There's a way I could be at home when no one's around and I just got out of the shower and I'm singing, dancing, and I have no clothes on and here we are. And as soon as I recognize that door opened up, all of a sudden I straighten up, reach for my towel, and now, okay, hi, how can I help you?
Sure.
So when we know we're being observed, most of the time, we're wearing our persona, we're wearing a role. We're not being necessarily exclusively genuine. And we see this with social media, lights, camera, action, and you're getting an actor or an actress.
Okay, so do you experience me much different on camera than you do in regular everyday life?
No.
No. So I feel like I feel like someone will get very close to the version of me in real life. The only difference is the level of engagement.
That's interesting. So you need a mechanism to get you to be true and present. Is that what you're saying?
Do I need a mechanism? Within a conversation, I would say so, yeah.
That's
within a
interesting.
conversation, yeah. There could be other things that can do the same thing, right? So if we have a meeting and we know we're like from 12 to 1, but even that, I'm saying that, but it's not true. Because even in a meeting, in a business meeting, how many times do people pick up their phone? What is the likelihood that you or I are going to pick up our phones? Right
Not
now?
happening.
Not happening. In a business meeting, what is the likelihood that someone's going to pick up a phone?
Depends on the nature of the meeting. I don't want to generalize, but I understand what you're saying. So yes, if somebody has access to, an escape hatch, which a phone can be and
Yes.
is most of the time, they'll use it because being present is uncomfortable. And it's very hard for us, especially in this distracted modern era. So I understand what you're saying. No phones at meetings would be a prereq, depending on the type of meeting and
Right.
the nature of the engagement. But I understand what you're saying. But it's what we talked about previously, in that we love to run, we love to escape, because when things
Previously, before the mic was on.
yeah. So we just have a habit of running away whenever it gets uncomfortable for whatever reason. And typically being fully present and still is the most uncomfortable place we can find ourselves without practice and training.
Right.
And so anything that brings us close to there, we run. And if we have a phone, it's a kind of easy way. Most people could, you could be in a conversation with someone and someone can start daydreaming while they're staring you right in the face
100%.
and blanking out until you see a glazed look and they're like, you snap a finger or something and get them kind of present again. So it happens in all ways, but I think what we're kind of talking about is our fear of just fully immersing ourselves in the moment with full presence and really kind of opening up, because we're scared to open up, because what's going to happen? I might see myself.
But here I am doing that, but meaning here in this conversation, I'm by choice coming here and sitting here, choosing to engage in something that will bring me present and will bring the other person present, right? So we're sitting in that.
The question is, how much is the conscious mind aware of that, and how much of it is subduing, let's say, the aspects of me that perhaps I don't want to share? Meaning, are you sure? Are you sure you're fully open and fully present because of these devices? Or is it the opposite potentially?
Go ahead.
If I know I'm being observed, then I want to perhaps appear a certain way and be received a certain way. And so if I want to appear a certain way and be received a certain way, I'm not giving you the genuine me. I'm giving you my persona.
Right.
And are we sure? What would be...
I think you might be projecting.
Maybe, very, very possible. I mean, listen, like I said, we all are in a way to get us to see ourselves. But of course, that's an aspect of me. I told you right away, this makes me very uncomfortable. The lights, the camera, the action, all of it makes me uncomfortable.
Right. The thread that I was going down there was more about when you were saying triggered, right? So triggered, we often associate with a negative feeling.
Depends on what we're looking for.
I got angry, I got disgusted, I got, bothered, irritated, whatever.
Right. It could be anger, or it could be a blessing to be able to see myself in such a way.
100%.
Right.
Right. But when you're talking, the example you gave was sitting in front of or waiting online in a grocery store, being cut off, and then anger, irritation coming to the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So the thread I was pulling on was, can you also go down something that feels like a more positive emotion and then learn something from that too? Something that feels more positive, present, engaged. I enjoy this. It's fun for me. Do you feel like there's also something to learn within that as well? That was where I was going with that question.
I mean, of course, there's something to learn all the time. And if we can sit with the anger and get behind it and behind it and behind it, right, we'll learn, we'll grow, we'll open up and hopefully release. And then the next time, if that release occurred, I won't get triggered and I'll know when the next person cuts me off.
So do you feel like I can sit with what I'm calling alertness, engagement, sit with that and also get behind it and behind it and behind it?
I mean, of course you can. It's a question for you, not me. Do you think you can?
Yeah, I'm thinking about something where there's there is the level of, in engagement, there's a giving and receiving that's going on.
Of course, an
Right.
exchange.
And I feel very comfortable with the exchange, the being giving and receiving in this exchange once I know there's certain parameters around it, like lights, microphone, camera. Like there's certain parameters that allow me to lean in.
Yeah,
in
no, I
ways
hear
that-
you, and that's beautiful, because then your ability to do that is going to bring that energy to the table, and then you're going to make me comfortable to do that too, and then we can get going. So whatever gets you into your flow, right? Whatever gets you into that level of expressiveness and openness, is what it's going to take, and perhaps it doesn't matter what it is. Maybe when we find the medium, we stick to the medium, and then we allow that medium to open us up. Now, when you're open, you're bringing a different vibe. You're bringing a chill to the table that makes me feel comfortable, and so now I'm chilling. Now maybe I don't see the mics and the cameras, and I'm like just vibing with your energy right now, and now you're compelling almost the same out of me, so now I'm open, and now both of us are open, and that vibration amplifies, right? And then it becomes magnetic, and then we're being really genuine and raw, and then all of a sudden people start to engage with that out there. So I think, whatever the medium is that makes that happen, like, let's roll with that. That's a beautiful place. Now, if you can achieve that here and blunt my edges a little bit, then mazel tov. That's great for you.
Right.
It's great for me. And then hopefully if I could bring that to the table, then you can get deeper still, and then we can just work with one another off of these vibes and really just open ourselves up completely and start just, floating around in the air.
Right. That's the magic trick that I attempt to perform every time someone sits down here.
Don't attempt, because that's a manipulation. You're trying, right, to elicit an outcome. That's not genuine.
But I'll tell you, right.
But I hear you.
Right. But the magic trick is to make the lights, cameras, and microphone disappear.
Right. Yes.
So,
Yes. So, let's kind of help each other with that. And that's all we're doing. We're all helping one
And a
another
magician
out.
always has to say what they're doing, otherwise it doesn't work. That's why politicians tell you exactly what they're going to do. Then they lie them in it afterwards, but they always tell you first what they're going to do, because abracadabra.
Indeed.
I create as I speak.
But that's the idea, man. We're trying to help each other out. We're all here living this life, and it's challenging sometimes, and it's uncomfortable sometimes, and camaraderie, community, support takes the edge off and helps that process along. And so that's what we kind of owe to one another, to not suffer in silence alone. And I don't necessarily love to use the word suffer in this context, but we're all dealing with some level of discontent, right? That's an easy word.
Yes.
So we owe it to one another. We owe it to one another to share, to express, to help one another along, because we're all going through a hard time. One way or another, we're all going through a hard time. If not in this moment, then the next. So, we're doing it together. That's really kind of what it comes down to. If we're open and honest, otherwise we're selling each other, a pile of stuff.
As Ram Dass says, we're walking each other home.
Amen. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly what's going on. I kind of liken it just to build off of that, because I love that statement, and I consider Ram Dass a teacher in many ways. If we're all climbing up a mountain and we're all towards the base, the mountain is really broad. It's huge. And if I'm on the north face and you're on the south, and we have a buddy on the east and a buddy on the west, we can't see each other because the mountain's huge, and we're all on our own kind of trek where we're at. And we're all climbing towards one pinnacle, ultimately. But I might be having a hard climb, and so I can't see where you're at, but I'm going to yell out to you. I'm going to, yell out and say, Ellie, hey, man, my side's really jagged, and it's a rough climb. Now, if you can do the same for me, right, you're going to inform me and help me perhaps get a little bit more efficient in my climb. So if your side is really sunny and there's a lot to grab onto, right, and then our friend on the east and our friend on the west do the same, what are we doing? We're informing one another how to get up that mountain in the most efficient way possible. And so sharing information, sharing perspective is wildly critical, because we know that's what's going on here. And in that way, we help one another out, and we all get to that same place without, battering ourselves unnecessarily. And so that's kind of a metaphor for life.
Yeah. Yes. Oftentimes you talk about the medicine in the medicine space and the medicine in life, right? That everything is
Right, define medicine, right? It's
Yeah,
all
the
the thing.
microcosm.
It's all a tool to get free. All of it. It's all a tool to get free if we approach it in that way.
How do we define free?
I mean, that's a great question. If you're asking me, I could answer.
Yeah.
To be free is to let go of that persona, the role, the identity, and get behind there and see who I am behind all the thoughts about who I am, behind all the play, behind all of the manipulation, behind all the posturing. Like, what is going on here? Who am I really? Right? I'm not necessarily my name, it was inherited. I'm not necessarily some of my behaviors. They've been
By the way, that's a
conditioned.
tough one for people to register, that I am not my name. I know.
You want to explore it?
Yeah, just like I think the first time you mentioned to me, it's like, yeah, I'm not my name. What an interesting concept. But then there was a time where I existed in this form, in this body. I'm not even talking about getting spiritual. There was a time in this form, in this body, where I did not have my name, and it feels so.
I might have had it. I just had no clue what it was.
Well,
When you're a baby, right?
I'm talking right when a baby is born in Judaism. Right when a baby is born, there's no name. There's no name given.
And then what happens when the name is assigned? It's conditioned onto me because here I am without any verbal skills, and someone keeps looking into the crib and saying, Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. And I still have no clue, but then you pick up on the sound and you pick up on the vibe. And after a little while, you're older, your language skills kick in, someone from across the room, yells out, Daniel. What do? You turn. It's been conditioned upon you. And so I recognize that if we're talking about getting free, it's getting behind the conditioning. Because I see a lot of my language is borrowed. This is not mine. It's borrowed, much like my name, much like a lot of my behavior is conditioned upon me. We hear it all the time, and we do it for those of us that have children. Good boy, bad girl, do this, don't do that. We're not necessarily telling our kids what's best for them at times. We're oftentimes, unfortunately, telling them what's best for us. So if I'm on a work call and it's really important and I'm zoned in on it, and my kid comes through the living room with all his toys and he's making a racket and he's having fun, he's just at play, and I yell out to him, hey, don't do that. Then all of a sudden he questions why I'm telling him not to do that. And perhaps he starts questioning, well, is play not good? Should I not be free? Should I not be kind of open to express myself the way I want? I didn't tell him not to do that because he was doing something bad, or to teach him appropriately. I told him that because it wasn't good for me at that time. So now the kid starts to question play, or how to play, or where to play. And so that's a level of conditioning that I'm impressing on him, not for his benefit.
Right.
In that moment, it was for my benefit. And then you start to really look at it, and a lot of my reactivity is not the true me. It is layers and layers of conditioning. And we can see that just like in the example of, being online and having someone cut us. And now we're thinking that was bad, or we have an idea of why that shouldn't happen to me. And again, if you kind of really sit with it for a moment, you might see that there is something behind there that was impressed upon me throughout my years that made me evaluate that as something negative. But again, it's not inherently me, it's conditioned behavior. So if I start to really peel the layers back, like, who am I behind the conditioning? Who am I behind the assigned name? Who am I behind this language that I'm borrowing? And then you start to recognize that, man, maybe I'm not living an authentic life because I don't know what an authentic life is, because all I'm doing is just repeating the drama and repeating the conditioning over and over and over. And so when we talk about coming to that awareness, and we recognize that there's more to the story behind my thoughts and impressions and conditionings, then we start to say, well, how do I undo this?
Right.
If I'm conditioned, then how do I decondition, right? How do I wipe this software? Because maybe it got me to this point, and maybe that was all appropriate in some way, but in this particular moment, if I want to transcend my self-imposed limitations, which is that conditioned package, that script that I'm reading from, how do I do that? Like what could I grab onto to use as leverage to get behind who I think I am? And then we start recognizing that life is throwing us all these opportunities. In fact, life threw that lady in front of me to cut me off in order for me to see the anger, in order for me to peel back why the anger is happening, in order to recognize that I'm angry because when I was a kid, someone did that same thing to my dad and he was, freaking out and told me, don't ever let anyone do that to you. Meanwhile, the person that cut him off was, buying one item and it was Band-Aids because their kid was bleeding out. And, here we are with a full cart. So maybe it was really appropriate. So the idea is I start to recognize that, hey man, behind, all of these seemingly mundane, superficial moments in life, there's a tool that I could use
to decondition.
Amen. Right.
So,
but I have to be able to be aware and present in the moment to allow that.
So I didn't catch what am I grabbing onto, right? Because if I'm conditioned, and once I recognize that I'm conditioned, and your explanation, I think, articulates it in a way that most people can hear that very clearly and say, yes, I am actually conditioned. This is not me. If I was born in a different country, in a different family, in a different set of circumstances, maybe even just a different birth order in the same family, a lot of things about me would be very different. So who I think I am is not who I am. So, okay, so now
I
as I'm climbing up,
that I was with my kid in line and he didn't freak out when somebody cut me off. He was just chill. For him, it was like no thing because he's just in this environment. He's tripping. He's like, wow, what a beautiful place. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. So carry on. I don't want to cut you off, but I just want you to us to understand that it's easy to spot. It's easy to identify because I'm the one that freaked out. I was carrying the anger. He was fine.
Right. No, I get that. Right. So we find that the trigger, meaning, okay, this is the light bulb just went off. Look here. Okay, good. But how do I know I'm not using my conditioning to sort through this, and now I'm just layering conditioning on top of conditioning?
I mean, you might be, but if you sit with it, you'll know.
Okay, so that's what I want to know. How do we know? Because, what am I grabbing on to know?
So look, we identified that the superficial is me blaming the outside world for a problem. Then we say, wait a minute, there's a deeper way to look at this and use it as a form of medicine to reveal an aspect of me that is ready to go. And so you don't have to run an intellectual process. You just have to sit with it. Just be present and don't run away from it. And if you can do that, the flower will unfurl because the whole thing's looking to resolve itself. In fact, it's the intellect that grabs onto the conditioning. So using my intellect in that moment might not be the way to go. Now, what's beyond the intellect? Well, let's use a simple kind of tool that we have with us all the time that's always there, always working, and without it, we wouldn't be around, and that's the breath. And so perhaps my intellect is what got me into a jam. Perhaps my intellect, you're 100% right. Maybe my intellect is furthering the conditioning.
Right.
Because where does the conditioning take root? In the intellect. Right. So how do I use, that intellectual faculty to undo the aspect of me that's wound up through the intellect? They say the tool that gets you into a mess isn't going to be the tool that gets you out of a mess.
Right.
So if I recognize the intellect has been conditioned since day one, then I say that's not the tool that I need right now. So the anger comes up, right? I'm not going to use my intellect in that moment. In that moment, I'm just going to start to breathe. I'm going to say, wow, anger's here. Here we go, right? Life served me a cup of medicine in this experience where the lady cut me in line. And now anger flares up. I don't need to analyze it with my mind. I don't need to ask her why she did it or look around me and see which pathway
or
she
even
took.
focus on it.
Exactly.
Sit with the anger.
Something's coming up in me. Now the time is to focus in here. And so what do? We recognize it's not the intellect, not the tool we need right now. I'm going to put that one to the side, in fact. In fact, we overuse the intellect, especially, from a Western upbringing. Anyways, we put it to the side for a moment. We start to just breathe and just sit with the anger and watch what happens. Watch it. It'll start to rise up more and more and more. And in that rising, there's an opportunity for it to pass. Anything that we're suppressing, right, can't pass. We have to give it space to rise.
Right.
So if I'm just going to default to my breath, and I'm going to be with it, and I'm going to sit with it, and I'm not going to run away from it, which is what medicine teaches us, right?
Just that we can't, often.
Because of our programming.
No, we can't run away from it.
Oh, when you're in the
Yes,
medicine
yeah,
space,
yeah.
well, that's the idea. That's why we go into these really uncomfortable situations, because we're making a deal with ourselves that we're going to confront whatever's going on in there without the ability to run, which takes a lot of, a lot of intestinal fortitude to get to that place. But that's why it's such a powerful, powerful tool, because it brings you face to face with it, and there's nowhere to go. And if you try to run, you're gonna have a very, very hard time. You're gonna create a lot of friction for yourself, and you're gonna fight, and eventually you're gonna lose the energy to fight. Mother Nature always wins, and then you're gonna finally submit, and then it's all gonna rush up and then rush out. So the idea is, again, in that hypothetical scenario, the anger flares up. I know it's not my intellect that's gonna get me out of the mess, because my intellect got me into the mess because I thought something was inappropriate with that moment, when maybe it was just a perfect moment. Maybe there's a harmonious reason and I'm just not aware of it. And so I go one step deeper, the intellect goes to the side, I start to just breathe, and I'm okay with it. I'm not trying to suppress it. I'm not trying to force it out. I'm not trying to reject it. I'm just breathing. And I'm letting the system do its thing. And then what happens is there's a beautiful capacity in the body-mind complex that wants to heal. It just wants to heal, and it's actually designed to self-preserve. It's designed to heal itself, but we get in the way. So getting out of the way implies that I'm not going to fight this. I'm just going to let it be, and I'm going to sit with it. And then there's another layer behind that. As I'm sitting with it, just like giving it space to unfurl, right? Because when something's really tight, we can't necessarily see what's contained within it, right? Because it's buried under all of these layers. But when I breathe and I'm just giving it space and I'm saying, it's okay, it is what it is, and we're just gonna hang with it because it's happening. It's happening, and I'm not ready to push it back down because I recognize I don't want anger in my life anymore. And so as I'm breathing and I'm sitting with it, it starts to unfurl and starts to kind of have space to open up. And as it has space to open up, it starts to reveal its inner essence. And that inner essence might take me back to a moment where I first felt angry. It might take me to a moment of a previous conversation or experience or whatever it was that rooted itself in me as a layer of that conditioning. And only by letting it rise up and reveal itself can it possibly pass. It can't pass if I'm going to kind of keep smushing
Keep pushing it
down.
away.
Yeah, and so it basically comes down to the breath and just letting the body do its thing. But the mind, unfortunately, has been conditioned to run from discomfort. And that process that we just went through, a medicine of sorts, is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to sit with anger. It's uncomfortable to understand
Right.
where, what was the catalyst for the anger in the first place. Because I might learn something about myself that I might not like. And so the intellect jumps up and says, well, I'll protect you. And this is more than intellect, this is more ego, because the ego is designed for self-preservation. So anything that starts to threaten me, the ego says, well, I'll save you from this, I'll protect you from this. But by smushing it back down, or having me escape, or having me just address the superficial layer, or grab my phone, I'm actually not getting to the cause. I'm using a temporary Band-Aid to patch over the discomfort so I could run away from it. And then I'm left carrying this. And if I'm carrying this, what else am I carrying? So the idea is it starts to accumulate and pile up. In the last podcast we did, we talked about like the 6 stages of disease, and accumulation, unfortunately, daisy chains out to a whole world of problems. So I don't want to accumulate anything. I want to actually resolve stuff, let stuff go, and be in a state of openness. And we use all of these medicines to get to that place of freedom.
Would the word choice be appropriate here? Meaning...
You have to make a choice.
No, that you now have choice, more choice. Meaning when you're talking about freedom, it are more options, more choice. So I'll give you an example. Using your example.
Sure.
You're in the grocery store. Someone cuts you off in line. Anger bubbles up. There was no choice. Right? That all of a sudden comes to the surface.
Something wants to resolve itself. That's right.
Now, after the anger, not inside, externally, right? After the anger, there's something that wants to be said or did, or, externally it can be an explosion. Internally it can look like blame, criticism, a negative story about where their day is going and the luck they have or whatever, right? There's a lot of different places. There are a lot of different things I can now attach to that anger, all of it that feel somewhat choiceless.
Yes.
In the whole, spectrum of choices. Take you with your child in that same interaction. Someone cuts him off in line. Someone cuts you both off in line. If you get angry, you don't have the whole menu of options that your child does in the story. He can get excited by the balloons.
Yeah, he didn't even recognize that moment.
Yeah.
But I'm stuck in reactivity.
Exactly. So there's less choice.
There is no choice. It's just the kind of, it's the, again, in that state, I become reactive. I'm not responding to the moment. I'm reacting to it. And a reaction, right, by definition, is an action that we're doing again. So it's just a layer of programming that's manifesting not from a choice, from no choice. So I am beholden to it.
Exactly, right. So as there's freedom, meaning as we're going through that process, I'm just trying to put language to it that it's easier for me to understand and hopefully easier for others as well, is that suddenly, as I'm working through something, now I have more choice in that domain, and that same event happens and suddenly I have more choice. And now I know I've been deconditioned because I have choice.
Right, you're able to respond as opposed to react. Now, I don't want to get into a conversation about semantics, but what you call choice, I call freedom.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, great. That's exactly what my question is.
Yeah, you have more spaciousness.
Yes.
Where you can respond to the moment as opposed to letting the conditioning dictate where it's going to take you.
Right.
Last thing I want to do is be led around by someone else's story. And what is conditioning? Someone else's story. It's someone else's programming. It's not mine. I wouldn't choose to have anger in me. If I could choose, right? I would say, I don't need anger. It's silly.
Right.
So it's someone else driving my car. Why would I let someone do that when I'm not sure where they're going?
Right. So as you're talking about conditioning, I guess because of my conditioning, the first thing I'm thinking about is religious conditioning. A couple of days ago, someone shared a video with me, and I guess they shared it with someone else I know who thought to also share it with me. So I got it twice. Obviously I needed to get it twice. And what it was seemed like a therapist standing on stage giving a talk and saying that oftentimes when a parent wants a child to do something, they'll put God into that conversation. God will be angry at you if you don't do that. God will punish you if you don't do that. And what that does to the child because of what the child was conditioned to believe about God. He didn't use the word conditioning, but for the purpose of these conversations,
that's what it is, right?
Yeah, and just how dangerous that is. So as I'm thinking about the level of conditioning, I'm thinking about religion from two perspectives. Going back to freedom. On the one hand, there's that conditioned aspect of religion, right, where we're putting something onto someone else or something is put onto us. And every religion's stated intention, I believe, is to create freedom. It says liberate. It says the Torah, for example, just to go there in case anyone wants a source, because they're conditioned to need a source for truth. So it says about the Torah that they were engraved on the... I've heard this from Effie. I heard this many times, but Effie Palvanov, who I spoke with on the podcast, he pointed this out, that the word for engraved is charut, which is the same word as freedom. So we say that the 10 Commandments were engraved on the tablets. It was engraved on the tablets, and these were also tablets of freedom. Meaning, just in Hebrew, using those words in the same way, the purpose of these tablets was to create freedom. So now thinking of that dichotomy.
So in that capacity, it's a tool, you're saying, yes? It's a tool.
For freedom.
Amen. So carry on.
Right. So, but where that split happens is so interesting. Right? Meaning...
I understand. Now, but the observation is any tool can be used in two ways. Meaning, you could use it as a tool for liberation, but what's the opposite of that? What's the opposite of liberation?
Imprisonment.
Right.
But I was making a different point, similar to what you're saying, is that its stated intention is liberation, and it seems to be something that can create more conditioning than anything else.
Depends on who's using it and how and why. Sure.
Right, but just objectively as a tool, if I want to condition someone, using religion and using God is a great way to condition someone. So this same tool that was introduced to the world and says, here, use this for liberation, now can be used for, not conditioning, everything can be used for conditioning, for the heaviest, for the most sticky conditioning. If I had to layer conditioning, just for my own, just whatever, okay? This is not a comprehensive list, but if you condition someone with criticism, that's kind of like level 1. If you condition someone with praise, that's level 2. This is a lot more sticky. I put a thorn in someone, you want to get it out. I put honey on you, you want to lather it, lather, rinse, repeat. Let's do this again, right? That's why when you mention the danger of a podcast like this or putting your face out there, the risk is not the criticism. The risk is the praise. Because we can start identifying with
it
that.
Could build up the ego, for sure.
Right. So level 1, criticism. Level 2, praise, the stickiness of conditioning. I'll get much more conditioning from someone if I praise them than if I criticize them. And then level 3, religion. I'm not saying that those are the only levels, but I would say even more sticky than praise is religion. So that's what I'm thinking about, is the stated intention of this tool and how it can do not just any kind of conditioning, the most extreme form of conditioning probably that exists is this one.
So with that awareness, use it appropriately. Now that's on you. That's the response. To point to this kind of physical reality that we're engaged with and in. All matter. It's all stuff, right? And all matter has two poles. There's a positive charge, there's a negative charge, right? And so the higher the capacity for that positive charge, the more of the negative is inherently captured because it's all corresponding degrees.
Oh.
Right? So you're pointing how heavy it could be on the conditioning side. Well, that must mean it's got a corresponding amount of juice for the liberating side. And so the more powerful the tool, right, the more it could be used.
The more it could be abused.
Amen. Right.
Okay, so
when someone realizes they have a really powerful tool, they could use it in both ways, right? Because everything has two poles. So it's not a question about the tool. It's a question about who's using it. But when we speak to the tool itself, we understand that if something has that amount of power to liberate, right, as the 10 Commandments do, then has a corresponding amount of power to oppress and to imprison. And so be careful who's holding it, right? Now, I don't know who held it before and who's going to hold it in the future. But here and now, if you and I are coming to this awareness, we could integrate this as a beautiful lesson for us to be present and mindful with how we use some of these tools that we've been given. Because we understand how powerful they are, which means we have to be very, very sensitive with how we use them.
Right. So there's a conditioned part of me that wants to reject what you're saying, is that I feel like I was introduced, not to broadly religion, meaning if you talk about religion as being dangerous like that, my mind can get around.
It's a heavy topic, by the way.
Yeah, for sure, which is good. What's important? If you talk about how religion can be misused, that my mind can get around in any capacity. But let's say you take like the Torah, right? There's a part of it that you say, at least the way we're taught, it's good. It's good. Like it's good. You can trust it. So when you're saying that, when you're saying it in this way, I get that they're right. That's why this game is hard to play, because what's freedom and what's conditioning? It can always sound like that. But let's tease it out a little bit, and maybe I can also ask not my understanding. I know that you've kind of been on a journey with your own Judaism.
Of course.
Right. And
Big time.
having grown up very far removed from it, on your last podcast, I think you described yourself at one point as an atheist.
Agnostic.
Agnostic.
I was recognized,
Right. Atheism is a religion.
Yes, sir.
So, okay. And then obviously through medicine and other things, recognizing that there's a lot more behind the veil. And then working with, interfacing, interacting,
Getting
comfortable with it, but also with a lot of people who are steeped deeply in the Jewish faith, and the Jewish tradition and the Jewish ways. Working with it, it's prompted your own journey with it. So in that lens of like taking all that in the soup, how would you explain the poles in, let's say, the Torah, right? Its ability to liberate, its stated intention to liberate, its capacity to liberate, and also its capacity to condition at that same extreme level. Is there a way you can explain both?
Who's using the tool? Who's using the tool? So you point at the 10 Commandments, the tablets. It's a pretty good model for life. There's nothing there that we're going to kind of nitpick and criticize as being questionable advice. Unless you feel otherwise.
Right, I'm thinking.
I mean, if you want to run down the 10, I mean, it's a pretty decent model for how to live clean, right? And then we have an expansion of those 10 commandments. And then we have commentary on the expansion. And then we have commentary on the commentary. And then we get to a voluminous data set that is hard to parse through. And then what happens is when you have such a huge data set, as we know with data, you can make it say anything you want based on how you present it or represent it. And so it's very easy to get lost in there. And so even some well-intentioned individuals might make a mess of it because it is such a powerhouse of a tool that it's very easy to get caught up and miss the mark in terms of its capacity to liberate and get caught up in the dogma and ideology of it, and then present it to others as the thing. So it has such a long history, which is so beautiful in so many ways, that it's presented an opportunity for individuals to misuse it as a result of its expensiveness, if that makes sense. So I don't know if I'm explaining anything away. I'm kind of giving you my point of view on how it's so easy to get caught up and lost in something that is designed for the exact opposite in terms of functionality. And if we point at liberation and freedom, I think that is, I don't want to say end game, but I think it points to end game, because end game is something that we can't put into words. It transcends our ability to speak about it and think about it and bring it down to intellect, because once we do, it's not the thing anymore.
Right. Well, as you're talking,
so I think it gets us to the point where we are nose to nose. And then our job is to kind of take the next step and walk through and quote unquote merge.
Right. I'm thinking, so you're talking about Shabbos, because it has that capacity almost more than anything, where for someone who's not practicing Shabbos, and they say, the first thing you say, oh, wow, no electronics. Like, this is cool. No electronics. You practice that, and there's a lot of liberation after the buzziness goes, 3-4 weeks, whatever it is, and that buzziness goes, like, wow, I can really get used to this. This is great. My wife just, in the last couple of weeks, stopped using electronics on Shabbos. And there's a difference in the whole house. Where even though I stopped doing this a few years ago, but with her stopping, there's a different energy in the whole. I don't know if it's the woman's effect on a house or what it is, but completely different energy in the whole house. And at that level, Shabbos is very liberating. For her, for our family, for us. And then last week I was in shul, and this guy who's coming closer to Judaism over the last bunch of years says to the rabbi, asks the rabbi about Uno, if you're allowed to play Uno on Shabbos because it's separating cards and colors, and there's a problem of separating. And he's like, I just don't play Uno because I don't know if it's separating. And the rabbi kind of smiled, so I asked him, so what was that? I said, would you play Uno? He's, listen, I keep it simple. He said, there was these laws only like a couple hundred years ago that it was transcribed in this way because people were afraid of it being lost, so they transcribed it. Before then, it was kind of like I did what I saw in my house. Like that's the way people kept Shabbos. Like this is what I did in my house, so I'm going to do it also. So in my house, we played Uno. Happens to be my dad's a rabbi, and a lot of my siblings are too. That's what we knew. I'm not digging further than that. And it was just seeing that contrast. As I'm kind of answering my own question of seeing that contrast, how Shabbos for one became very oppressive very quickly. I want to do something, I can't do it, I'm not sure, so I'm not going to move. Mm-hmm. Right? It just turned into something that seems to be the opposite of the stated intention. And then seeing how someone else practicing it for a while, it's just no, we don't have to carry it around like this incredibly heavy burden. And that. Right, and that dance can always go, like you can end up losing the thing. But where I want to go now is, you made a strong statement, right? Which is if something has a positive charge as an equally negative charge. So you and I have had conversations. Your podcast is about, I've spoken a lot about plant medicines. Mm-hmm. So we both, in many ways, acknowledge the powerful positive charge that exists there. So can we talk about the negative charge?
Absolutely. I mean, what angle do you want to approach it from? We can go down a list of the potential pitfalls of plant medicine. I think, and it's appropriate to speak about it because it's so I don't know. It's popular, right? It's all over pop culture. It's everywhere. You can't turn around right now without hearing about these tools. So
NFL season starting now. You got Aaron Rodgers has made ayahuasca famous for
absolutely
every football fan.
Absolutely right. So, I mean, look, man, it's like everything else. We need food to survive. It provides satiation, nutrition, etc. But if we overdo it, food becomes a poison very, very quickly. And we can, talk about diabetes, arteriosclerosis, all these negative aspects of using food. We're not
even healthy food.
I mean, man, you can overdo anything. Too much of anything will make you an addict, right?
Right.
So they say, what is poison? Poison is taking more than what you need from a thing. So everything has the capacity to be both sides of the equation, right? So with plant medicine, we could experience the exact same corresponding value on the negative side of the equation from the standpoint of getting caught up in it as a drug. If I'm turning to plant medicine every time I get uncomfortable, then I will create an attachment to it from a negative aspect in that it becomes a crutch for me. And then I can't deal with a bad mood or, frankly, anything else I'm dealing with in life that might be uncomfortable without turning to this as an escape or as a gateway away from just being present. And so it's easy to get caught up in it from that standpoint, where now it's a crutch. Now I seek it out every time something's going sideways.
So let's see if we can do this. With religion, we went from the poles of heavy conditioning to liberation, right? That's the pole, right? That's the spectrum.
Okay.
As much as it can liberate you, it can condition you.
Sure.
So with food, as much as it can nourish you, it can poison you.
Right on.
Right? So can we put plant medicine in a nice
What's the
little
difference?
bumper sticker?
What's the difference between religion, food, and plant medicine? They're all tools.
Right.
So they all have these corresponding poles. So they
Right.
could all be used for the same two purposes.
Right. But I was specific with my words, right? Meaning food, the pole is nourishment and poison.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the pole. Religion, the pole is liberation and the opposite of liberation, conditioning.
Right.
What is the two poles for plant medicine?
Liberation and
Conditioning?
I would say it's heavier than conditioning. It could be liberation, and the opposite in my mind, you said it before, it's prison.
You're saying plant medicine could become a prison for someone
Of course.
by relying on it too much.
Yes. The way I
Seeing
see
it as the only thing.
yes, because it's a very powerful tool,
Right.
and plant medicine is a catch-all for a bunch of different, what to call them?
Chemicals? I don't know.
Chemicals. Okay, well, we could use it for a moment. So,
Recipes, chemicals.
yeah. The way I see it is plant medicine has a very unique, special, and confrontational way of teaching us lessons, broadening our perspective and consciousness. The ultimate lesson that I've discovered throughout my journeys in that space is that the recipe for going into it comes down to three factors. And it's to just breathe, have an intention, and remember that everything's going to pass. That's the way I was taught to approach these substances. So I have an intention, and there's something in me, there's anger in me, and I don't know why it's there. It's buried really deep down. I don't understand the cause of it. I've been addressing the symptoms all my life, but I really want to get to it, and I haven't been able to do it through talk therapy, through all of these other healing modalities, and someone suggests plant medicine to me. And the way they instructed me was in that three-step process. It's, hey, have an intention. Why are you coming here? You're not coming here to mess around. This is not something you want to mess around with. This is not a good time. And hold that intention. Come with that intention of, hey, I want to address this anger. I don't know what it is. It's too deep. Can you please help me, right? I'm kind of opening myself up behind my conditioning to really get down to it, figure out why the anger's there. So that's my intention. Now, I go into the session recognizing that I'm not going to be doing anything. Something is going to be done to me, so to speak, in that I'm going to just breathe. I'm going to surrender my intellect. I have my intention. I'm not going to figure this out. I wasn't able to figure it out before, so the last thing I want to do is come here and use my intellect. I'm trying to get behind my intellect, right? So hold on to your intention, show up, just breathe, It's going to do the thing. It's going to help you open up and see behind that conditioning. And remember that it's all going to pass, meaning some of these moments might be very, very heavy, especially if you're getting down to it, right? And if we're dealing with trauma, if we're dealing with some of the kind of heavy hitters in terms of human psychology.
Kind of the life-defining events.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And they're buried really deep down, right? So the idea is some of this stuff is going to come up. It's all going to pass. There's really no such thing as a bad trip. You're actually going in there to see the dark stuff. You're going in there to go through it. And that means it has to come up. And that means you're going to come face to face with it. But only by facing it down will you actually get through it. Otherwise, you're running from it the whole time. So I was instructed, don't try to run because it's going to chase after you, because you're literally making a deal for the next 4 or 5 hours to stare it down, to face it, to allow it to pass. So remember that no matter what happens, whether it's a beautiful moment, whether it's a heavy moment, no matter what it looks like, it's going to pass, right? And so be comfortable that this is safe. You're going to get through it. It's okay. Just breathe. Hold on to your intention. That's it, right? And so I thought they were talking about
Medicine.
just that 4 or 5 hour session. After going through a lot of these, I recognized, wait a minute, that's a recipe for life. It was taking these experiences and opportunities with plant medicine to integrate those 3 tools into my being so that I can deploy them
Always
on a day-to-day basis. And in that way, whatever's happening in life, whatever's going on, plant medicine taught me that lesson. It's happening for a reason. It's going to pass. Just breathe, relax, be present, and remember that intention, whatever it is for different people, right? For me, it was, let's say, to decondition, to get back behind it. So constantly, when I'm in the default world, I'm always breathing, obviously. I'm just kind of a little more aware of it now as opposed to being aware of my thoughts, because the thoughts are running and running and running, and I realize, wait a minute, the thoughts are conditioning, and that's happening anyway, so I don't necessarily need to pay attention to that. It's all there. All those programs are there. So I'm just a little more present with my breath and kind of being in that place as opposed to this place. And I remember what my intention is. Well, what's going on here? Well, I'm trying to get behind the conditioning, and that's just kind of my goal. That's my true north, right? And no matter what's going on, whether the lady cuts me off in line, whether I get angry, whether somebody honks at me, in traffic, whatever it is, I recognize that, hey, man, that's just a passing moment. That's this passing moment. But whatever it's bringing up inside of me, that's what I'm going to lean into. That's what I'm going to kind of allow to happen. I'm going to give that space to happen. And then through that process, I'll be able to eliminate one layer of conditioning. And in that elimination, I am deconditioning. I'm getting emptier, cleaner, closer to my true north, to my goal. And so when we talk about plant medicine, I think that's probably the ultimate lesson that it taught me. It showed me a lot of things. It taught me a lot about everything. But if someone were to ask me what's the greatest takeaway, I could say, hey, man, I can shortcut you years and years of working with these plant medicines. That the ultimate lesson is that's what it's going to teach you. Do those 3 things, because life is serving you medicine all the time, but you're just running away from it all the time because we have the ability to. With
Right.
plant medicine, you don't have the ability to run away. So having to, be kind of forced into presence, those 3 teachings, that tri-pack, one teaching was really impressed upon me. It was a form of conditioning that was agreeable to my process. And so, you take that on the road. And then if you apply that methodology to the default world, everything that's happening becomes your medicine. Everything is your medicine. The good moments, the bad moments, all of it is medicine. You're recognizing, wait a minute, all of this is passing phenomena. And here I am working my stuff out, deconditioning.
Right.
And all I need to do is just relax and breathe. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to judge it. I don't need to evaluate this moment, because we get caught up in evaluation mode so quickly. We want to come to a conclusion. We want to know. We want to understand. But ultimately, you can't evaluate something kind of mid-stride, right? You're not going to evaluate a movie until its conclusion, a book until you get to the last chapter. You're not there. So why don't you wait to get to the end of it before you go into evaluation? And here I am in this moment. I could recognize that I'm not at the end of anything right now, right? We're like mid-stride, so I'm not going to evaluate this conversation as being good or bad. It's just happening, right? But everything that's coming up inside of me is coming up so it can finally pass. All I need to do is sit here and breathe, and how easy Mother Nature's serving me medicine in all these different ways. I'm not supposed to judge it or think that my medicine is only a cup of ayahuasca or, 5 grams of mushrooms.
So you see that as the real danger. If someone does go down that thinking,
I don't know if it's a danger because it's going to teach you a lesson one way or another. The question is whether it's going to be a soft landing or a bumpy one. So you're going to learn one way or another. I'm not saying that...
bro, just when we talk about those poles...
I'm saying it's a possibility. You can get liberated. One person could have one plant medicine experience, see the whole thing in a nutshell, some of what I described, and say, okay, that's it, I'm done, good, done. And the other person might say, wow, that was rough, but it was amazing. It taught me so much about myself. Wait a minute, I want to know more. I want to know more. I want to know more. There's more and more. There's an infinite amount of knowledge and learning and layers and dimensions and levels. There's an infinite amount. It's very easy, to get caught up in that, vastness. So I don't know what it's going to be for one person or the other, and I'm not going to say the tool is good or bad, right? I'm saying give up your evaluation, just breathe, relax, remember why you came here in the first place, and remember it's all passing phenomena. None of it's sticky unless you allow it to be, unless you take it on and hold on to it. Now, if you're holding, you're accumulating, we're back to the 6 stages of disease. That's going to lead down a pathway that you don't want to go down. How much are you going to hold on to? You can't take it with you when you go anyway. In fact, if you're holding on to it, that might mean that the cycle keeps repeating, and that's what some people call reincarnation. And that's a byproduct of holding. It's not that the system wants that to happen to you. You want it to happen because you're busy holding on to all this stuff.
Right. So let me parrot it back in my words and see if you feel like I'm understanding what you're saying. So medicine on the one pole.
Which medicine, just to be clear?
Plant medicines.
Okay.
Right. Plant medicines on the one pole has the ability to bring us to extreme presence. And we have no choice in the matter. We're there, we try to run away, then, like you said,
we'll
it just comes
into submission.
Yeah,
yes.
it just comes after us. Okay, so that's on the one. But on the other extreme, it can actually make us not present to everything else. And we think that those moments have less value.
Absolutely.
So that's where it can really become dangerous.
That's a great way to reframe it. Because if I think that illumination only happens in the plant medicine space, then the mundane world, the default world for me is quote unquote, no good.
Right.
It's not getting me there. I've just created a there, and I've just created a way to get there, and I've just identified and associated with the only way because nothing else has made me feel this way. But then my question would be, well, when have you really been present to that degree? Right? So the plant medicine is just teaching us to be really present in the moment.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've heard from many people. Not many people, but a number of people who've gotten lost in the medicine space for a period of time. And I think I do agree that for the most part, I've seen that the medicine is kind of self-correcting.
Anything that becomes the only way is an attachment because you're rejecting everything else to hold on to that one thing.
Right.
So it's no longer the thing. Now what
idol.
You think is the thing is the attachment and the hang-up. Now it becomes your block.
Yes.
Mazel tov, you just showed up, right?
Right.
Now apply that to religion.
What?
Now apply that to religion.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing.
And the truth is that the religion in the end will liberate. And I'll tell you why. Is because, you see it happen generationally, right? Where it becomes so restrictive, where someone says, I want out. Mm-hmm. And they throw the whole thing off. And then in that moment, they have incredible amount of choices. in, in front of them. Right. It brings us to such a level of imprisonment
Yes.
that we're desperate for freedom.
Yes.
In fact, it's ironic.
So you're saying one way or another, we're going to get to that final destination. It's only a question of how smooth or
the
bumpy
ride
the
will
ride
be.
is.
Right. Right. We
So
will
it's
get
all
to
designed.
liberation.
That's the whole point. It's all designed to free us up.
You know what the irony is?
But if we think one thing's doing it, then we're rejecting another thing, saying that's not doing it. Now we're creating polarity. Now we're creating two. Now we're stuck all over again because now I'm going to cling to one and reject another. But what did plant medicine teach us? Right? It's all happening. It's all coming up. It's all the pathway. If you could just breathe and be present and remember your true intention of why you came here in the first place.
Why you came here to this world or here to the medicine space or both?
Both. It's all the same. So it's the microcosm informing the macrocosm, and in that way, it's all fractals. It's all built into the whole thing.
Right. And
Just
I guess
a question of our perspective.
Right.
And that's why it's important to share these conversations, because this is medicine. And now if somebody out there hasn't taken a cup of ayahuasca or eaten 5 grams of mushrooms, but they hear this takeaway and get to that conclusion, they just got their medicine without having to go through a 4 or 5 hour,
Right.
proper, journey and getting their, butt handed to them.
Right. And it can cause us to devalue the moment.
Absolutely.
Right. And these podcasts can do the same thing. Meaning I can do one of two things with these conversations. Is one I can say is, wow, how powerful it is to just sit and talk with another human being. Look what's possible. And, what's possible could be this ripple effect out somewhere else, right? When we record a conversation and then say, wow, this is possible in every single conversation. A conversation could be transformative.
Amen.
So then bringing that presence and engagement to it. But if we...
That's crazy powerful.
Right.
Just so you understand what's possible in these moments if we just kind of free ourselves up for a minute and use that same protocol. We're floating. And I can tell you right now, I'm like, I don't know if this will work for the podcast, but if we were to close our eyes right now and just check in and take a breath and feel what's happening, I don't want to color it and tell you what I'm feeling. I want you to kind of demonstrate. If I could write it down right now and just show it to the camera later, well, take a second and just
trust you to get a word.
What's going on? Like I could tell you for me, from my standpoint, and if while I'm speaking, if you can kind of get that feel, like right now, I have a vibration going up and down my back.
Do you have a word for it?
I mean, it's just a vibration. It's an energy, and I feel it up and down my spine, like radiating. It's warm, and it reminds me of a lot of experiences in plant medicine.
Cool.
I don't know. I don't know if that's where you're at, but I see, again, like what you're pointing at, the power of these conversations, the power of every single moment to be a form of medicine. If we just don't neglect that truth, then we come with reverence to ceremony. And when I know that this is ceremony, it's not trivial anymore. It's very, very serious and it's very special. And I can't neglect this moment and I can't alienate this moment. And my job in my process is to remember that in every moment and every interaction, no matter what I think it is. And so, when I'm coming into a plant medicine ceremony, it's like, I'm already mentally prepared. I already have an idea of what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden I take the medicine and I'm getting the exact opposite. So it's kind of teaching me saying, hey, man, let go of those expectations. Yes. You don't know which way this is going to go. And so much in the same way, in kind of the default world, I'm standing there pumping gas and I see some guy walking, towards me. And right away, for whatever reason, he looks disheveled and he has... this clipboard in his hand, and, I'm starting to come up with a story on who this guy is and what he wants from me, and I should be fearful perhaps. And then I just remember, hey, wait a minute, no expectations, just breathe. What was that intention you had? Oh, you wanted to get, behind your conditioning? Well, look, you just had your conditioning flare up. And then the guy walks over to me and, he's raising money for something, but then he says this word, and I don't remember what he said, but he said something that I heard like a moment ago, and then all of a sudden we're having a conversation, and all of a sudden, he's
Is this a true story?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this was about 24 hours after a plant medicine ceremony, and I'm leaving the facility, and I get in my car and I am driving. I need gas. I pull over. I'm getting gas, and I see somebody just kind of walking. Like I said, he's disheveled. He looks completely different from me. He's carrying a clipboard, and for whatever reason, I start telling myself a story about, who this guy is and what he wants from me and how, it's inappropriate, hurry up, finish pumping gas, say no, wave him off, get in your car. All this stuff starts really quickly, I start reacting. It starts, manifesting, colorizing my thoughts and creating this story. And then I just remind myself, wait a minute, a second ago, it was just breathe, have an intention, everything's going to pass. So I just, I relax and I recognize the story's happening, but I'm just paying attention to what's happening here, as he comes over to me, again, he was raising money for something, but I don't remember what he said, but he said something that I had heard perhaps in the plant medicine ceremony. I can't put two and two together to make this a proper story, but right after that, we got to talking, and it was a beautiful, beautiful, uplifting conversation where we both net out pointing at, the one source behind it all. But I had to let it unfold. And if I would have ran with my story, we never would have got there. And I would have stuck with that story. Then I would have driven off, and that story would have been imprinted on my mind. And then what happens is that level of conditioning will reemerge anytime I see anyone that matches his, let's say, look, height, build, etc. And so, I had this opportunity. Either I'm going to wind up the conditioning or I'm going to unwind it. And so every moment has that capacity. These beautiful moments aren't rare. In fact, it's the only thing that's happening. If I could open my perspective up enough to stop telling stories and get behind what I think is going on, what's really happening will reveal itself to me, because it's just the nature of it all. It's all designed to free us. It's all designed to liberate us. And we make the silly mistake, a conditioned mistake, thinking it's only this pathway, it's only that pathway, it's only this medicine, it's only this book. That's us telling ourselves story.
Right.
The whole thing is designed to free us up. The whole thing. It's a question of, can I come to this seemingly mundane moment with reverence and respect that it is ceremony, it is medicine, and it's my mind that's distracting me and having me run away. It transforms the whole game. It transforms life as we know it. Completely turns it upside down.
I hear it. Yeah. And right. And it's clear how the opposite lesson can be learned from each one. Like I'm seeing that through this, how in the 4 examples, I don't remember all the 4 now, but remember the final one of just these kind of conversations, how literally the opposite lesson could be learned. It's either it could become, wow, conversations have so much value, or it's only these conversations have value, other ones don't.
Right on. And that's not up to us.
What do you mean?
Meaning it's not up to us. Meaning I don't know how anyone's going to respond to any of this. Right?
Oh, I don't mean it from that perspective. This conversation has value even if it didn't get, even if the cameras failed and this didn't get picked up, which has happened on podcasts before. It doesn't become a waste.
Oh, it never is. There's no such thing. That's a level of conditioning. To think there is a waste, to think there is a wrong, to think there is a pathway that won't do the job, because a lot of people get right through suffering, like you identified before. When the suffering ratchets up, to a degree where, God forbid, my next decision is to, end the show, so to speak, or not, sometimes that's a direct pathway to liberation, because when I'm faced with the decision, that ultimate decision, right, which makes the story stop because my next step is off the ledge, then in that moment when the story stops, all of a sudden I taste and experience the expansiveness behind the story, and then I take a step back instead of a step forward, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what it took. And, I don't think it's not an appropriate way to frame it. But again, that's my conditioning. Here it is. It happened. So I'm not going to say it's inappropriate, appropriate. I'm going to say that sometimes, sometimes it's a leaf falling from the tree that wakes me up. And sometimes it's a level of suffering that's so unbearable. But basically, it's all about getting behind that story, into that spaciousness, because the story is very tight. the story has characters, and the story has, you know, a level of rigidity that gets very, very uncomfortable. And it turns me into an automaton of sorts where, you know, it's like eat, sleep, work, occasional pleasure, repeat. And I just keep going in that kind of cyclical rat race. And it gets very tight in there, and it gets very uncomfortable. So whatever gets me behind that, whatever that is.
Right, and you're saying that's available in every moment.
Yeah, and I'm saying when you get behind the story, you feel expansiveness. You feel freedom and liberation because you're not so defined, you're not so rigid, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that's what it is. You know, and that's there the whole time. Right. That expansiveness is there the whole time, but it's happening behind the thoughts. And, you know, it might point to some people could, you know, misinterpret that as saying that, you know, the thoughts are no good, but the thoughts get me, you know, to my food and get me to this and that. And it's like, you know, maybe. And I'm not saying the thoughts aren't bad. I'm saying the intellect is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful tool. But we have to use it appropriately, and we don't want to get caught overusing it and considering it the only tool, because then again, that tool becomes very oppressive. So again, intellect is a beautiful tool.
I think on our last discussion, you said the mind's a good employee, not a good boss.
Yeah, that's a cool one. I don't know. Did I?
I think you said that.
It's all borrowed anyway, right?
Yeah,
to attribute it to me is ridiculous, right? Because all of this stuff, everything that we said, again, from the language that we're using to all of these concepts that we're pointing to, they've all been said thousands and millions of times, right? So we're all kind of using borrowed language, concepts, ideas to point to something ineffable and to attribute it to any one person or thing is ridiculous because it's all borrowed, it's all inspiration. An artist walks through the museum, or anyone walks through the museum, you get all these imprints, you get all this inspiration, all of a sudden you come home and you start painting and you're just expressing yourself. There was an inspiration for that.
Right.
Now your painting might be a carbon copy of what you saw in the museum, or it might be a riff on it, an expansion on it. But ultimately, you didn't create it. It came through you, and you were inspired by something that came before you. So none of it's yours in the first place. To assign it to a me is to start to build the conditioning. I am this and I am that. And that kind of really flares up the ego. And we got to be careful with that. So anything that I've said here, God forbid, don't ever attribute it to me. We can find the source for it all. We could find someone that said it better and said it louder. And that's kind of the reminder. It's all springing from that source. And that source, that spaciousness, that expansiveness that contains it all is what we're pointing at with all these words. And we can get as far as we can with pointing until we recognize what it is that we're pointing at. And from that standpoint, from that place of expansiveness, there's nothing to be said. There's nothing to be done. It's all, there's no word for it.
Right. There was something you were saying about how, like the lesson's right there waiting to be learned, then it can come in a small interaction or in a major event or a medicine ceremony, a plant medicine ceremony. And it reminded me of a story. For years I would go to recovery from addiction meetings. And there was a gentleman there who I got to know pretty well, who, as a result of his addiction, he spent several years in prison. He lost his medical practice, destroyed his family. And he said even with all that, coming out of prison, he was still an addict, just figuring out a different way to do it that wouldn't get him caught, that wouldn't get him into that kind of trouble, that wasn't as reprehensible to society, but still very much living in his addiction. And he would share his story relatively often. I mean, for the years that I was there, he was there when I came and he was still there when I left. So I heard him say his story multiple times, and his story of where he had his aha moment was losing his keys. And something about losing his keys made him realize losing it and finding it, he said, it brought him to his knees in some way, and he just said, I'm done. And it made a strong impression on me. Here's a guy who, like I said, spent time in prison, lost his medical practice, lost his family or really damaged his family, definitely severed the relationship with his children. And with all that, his aha moment that he always shared was losing and finding his keys. And there was something in that experience that said, I'm done. I need a new way of life.
So, is it really the keys or is it his ripeness?
Exactly.
Right? So in that way, this moment is the totality of the thing. And it's ready to deliver that payload because it's all that's happening. The only question is our preparedness for that moment, how ripe we are.
Now I feel it. I feel complete. But I was saying I feel that same feeling up and down my spine.
So that was, I mean, it's all always here and now. The only question is, this thing, how ripe it is. It kind of also reframes our perspective, because I think that, I'm the doer. I'm going to find freedom. I'm going to find enlightenment. Enlightenment's looking to find us. It's looking to find us. It's here, I'm not present. It is. Yeah. And so it's not me looking to do anything. Again, that's the ego. That's the ego flaring up as the doer, thinking, I'm going to find it. Well, to say I'm going to find it means or implies that this is not it. So I'm just creating this cyclical kind of loop where I'm going to chase my own tail because I've created some story in my head of what enlightenment looks like and feels like. And I don't like that word, but it's the best one we got for the moment. So the idea is, wow, if I was, enlightened, I wouldn't feel this anger. If I was enlightened, I wouldn't, be here in this conversation in this chair. I'd be off in, the mountains somewhere. So in my mind, I'm rejecting this moment, saying this isn't it, which means it's out there somewhere, which means I have to go find it. And in doing that, I'm just running away from this moment where it's very present.
Right.
So again, it's more of that storytelling and that conditioning that says it has to look this way or that way. Who said? Who said how it looks like and when? And as soon as you come up with a concept, when we're talking about something that's beyond concepts, it's not the thing anymore. So if my mind's telling me it's out there, this isn't it, I'm pretty sure it's quite the opposite. I'm pretty sure it is it, and it's here, and it's now, and this whole sequence that's playing out in my mind is the only distraction. And in those brief moments where I get behind it and I have that aha, that chill, that presence, it's like, whoa, what is that? What does that mean? That means it's always here and it's always accessible. It's just a question of, whether I'm going to stop running, whether I'm going to just breathe into this moment and recognize, wow, this is all perfect.
Or I'm going to need a heavy dose of medicine to get to there. But either way, we're going home.
Amen. Amen. I'll reframe that. Either way, we are home. There's nowhere to go.
Right.
There's just nowhere to go. It's the illusion of going somewhere, which creates the concept that this isn't it. What's home? If it's not here and now, where is it? And anytime you experience it, guess what? It's going to be here and now.
Right.
So it's a bit of a paradox of sorts, right? And it messes with the mind because this isn't for the mind. This is, behind it, above it, below it, inside of it. I mean, any which way you point to it, it's not the thing. It's not something that's going to be conveyed in thought and word. If we could only kind of get behind it with one another and just be comfortable sitting in one another's presence without needing words, without having thoughts about, wow, this silence is uncomfortable. Let me talk about the weather, sports, this, that. If we could only kind of drop down into that place with one another, just like we talked about before, that some of these vibrations are very powerful and they become magnetic, and we can kind of work together in support of this here and now, then that's also very powerful. Then perhaps it's easier for someone else to drop into it.
Because it's there. Or
in
here.
a more palpable way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting out of the way meets in search of more.
Another paradox of sorts. Yeah.
Right. Another paradox. Well, one of the things I shared about name in search of more is, right, if we say we're in search of more, then there's a sufficiency in that because there's the recognition that there's always more. So we can sit in now and not be like, oh, there's more, because you say there's more as if that's a destination of more. But even when we get there, we know that there's also more, right? The infinite nature of it. So that means there can be a sufficiency in the now. So the in search of more doesn't have to be, I'm always looking for more out there. It's also the recognition that there's always going to be more. You're good. We're good. There is no destination. You know, I often with healing, people say like, oh, when I get healed, when I get whatever you think this word means. You know, I shared this when I was young. I read a book on graphology. I shared this on the podcast. I was very excited about it because you're able to do different things, you know, handwriting analysis. And I would tell people, I don't know, maybe I was 12 or 13, like write 3 sentences, make one of them false, and I'll tell you which one's false, right? And there were a lot of different, you know, it was kind of like graphology for dummies. And I was like, wow, how cool you can see all these things from handwriting. So I thought I was an expert on it. And my dad brought me a book that was, you know, a few hundred pages just on the letter I. And it's like I read that book. After the first book, I thought I knew a lot about graphology. After the second book, I realized I knew nothing. Right? So it's like he clued me into the infinite nature of graphology, and the truth is infinite. Every field, it's infinite. Anything we go into,
it's the infinite nature of stuff.
Yeah, of everything. Right. But of life, I mean, we can go down anything and access infinity.
Right.
Through anything. So, right. So while in search of more there is a paradox with that and getting out of the way, there is also a sufficiency in the message of in search of more, with the recognition that there's always more, so we can be here now.
So it's very much on theme because it's like everything else. It has these 2 poles. It could, you know, point to one place. It also, at the same time, has to point to the other.
Right.
Because you wouldn't know one without the other, right? And just like you point at infinity, what's the opposite of infinity? Nothing. And so we can kind of approach it both ways, right? It's very paradoxical when you start to speak about it, and you realize that your words will just run into a wall, and that's exactly where you need to be to drop them.
Yes, that was my first very, very difficult lesson I absorbed on medicine. It took, 10 plus journeys where I kept trying to figure it out, make sense of it. And it got very difficult and very uncomfortable because the only way I knew was to put words to it, to make sense of something, to categorize it. And eventually, after several very, very difficult experiences, I went to the space of just experience. Like there's no words. And the words are only going to screw it up. You know, early on in medicine, I was writing, I'd come pen and paper and,
trying to figure
before,
it out.
during, I was like, this, I got to remember this, got to know this, got to know this. And then at some point, it was very difficult to get to that space of like, wow, the mind is not it. It's just the same way.
It's very hard to hear. That's very, very hard to hear. You know, especially for people that have a Western upbringing. It's very hard to hear because the mind gets us all this stuff. What do you mean it's not it? Like, how am I going to function without my mind? Well, the question is, like, are you using your mind when you go to sleep?
The way I've said it is like this, is if I wanted to take in the whole world and I wanted to use just my eyes, I'd be missing a whole nother aspect of the world, everything I can taste. I can see everything in the world, but I'll never taste it. And same with touch, and same with hearing, and same with smell. So, okay, if we can't take in the whole world through any one of those senses, then what makes me believe that I can take in the whole world through my mind? That everything has to somehow fit into this, 6-inch by 6-inch space. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't make any sense. It's like, no, I can't fit it into my mind, just like I can't taste the smell, It's 2 different things.
The thing that you're trying to fit in there is the thing that has you in it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So you just gotta...
Let it go. Yeah. Thank you, Danny.
No, my pleasure,
Daniel.
man. These are tons
Appreciate
of
it.
fun. These are tons of fun. You know, if you keep going, we could, you know, just keep going and keep going, and then realize, holy shit, we're just spinning ourselves out of control. Of course, we can keep going. The whole point of this, if we got the point of it, is to just
Have an intention, breathe, and remember that this too shall pass. Amen.